The wind howled like a living thing that night, shaking the frozen trees of Denver's City Park until their branches groaned. Somewhere in the white fury of the storm, a billionaire named Nathan Reed stopped mid-stride, his boots buried in drifts. He'd walked this path every night for 10 years, ever since the accident that took his wife Laura, but tonight something stopped him cold. Over the roar of the blizzard came a sound no man could mistake a child crying. Not one voice. Several. If this were you, would you have walked toward the sound? Because Nathan did, and what he found would unravel everything he thought was buried. Stay with this story. What waits inside that mansion will shock you. The storm was the kind that swallowed all sense of direction. Snow whipped sideways and the air stung like broken glass. Nathan, 55, a man whose companies mapped satellites and built rockets, couldn't see 10 feet ahead. He pulled his scarf over his mouth and squinted through the blur. There it was again, a weak cough followed by a tiny voice whispering for help. Instinct pushed him off the path into the trees near the frozen lake. His gloved hand brushed against something small, unmoving. A mitten. Then a little further, 4 figures huddled together beneath a bench blanketed in snow. "Hey," he called over the wind, kneeling fast. "It's all right, I'm here." The oldest child, a girl maybe 7, turned her pale face toward him. "He can't breathe," she said, pointing to a smaller boy in her lap. "Please help him." Nathan tore off his gloves, pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck, fast, faint pulse. "You're freezing," he said. "We need to move." "What's your name, Sophie?" she managed. "This is Ben, and the twins, Ella and Evan." Nathan's throat tightened. They were wearing sneakers, sweaters, thin as paper. He shrugged off his heavy parka and wrapped it around the boy. "All right, Sophie, I've got you. My car's close. Are you safe?" she asked, her voice trembling, but her eyes steady. "Yes," he said simply, "and I'll keep you safe too." He carried Evan against his chest, feeling the small ribs flutter with every breath. The others clung to his coat as he led them through the storm toward the dim glow of his SUV. When they finally climbed inside, he cranked the heat, wrapped them in blankets, and turned to face them. "Where are your parents?" Sophie hesitated. "We were with the shelter group. The bus stopped near the museum, and then we couldn't find it again." Nathan nodded, jaw tight. He'd spent billions on machines that could track a storm from space, but right now he couldn't explain why 4 children were lost in his city. As they drove through the whiteout toward his mansion in Cherry Creek, the city disappeared. Every few blocks, the power grid flickered. The streetlights blinked and died, leaving only the dull red taillights of abandoned cars. Sophie whispered to the twins, in soft rhythmic words, a lullaby, maybe something she had learned to keep them calm. Nathan caught fragments of it, familiar notes that pressed on an old wound. He turned onto his street. The iron gate creaked open. The security lights flickered weakly. Inside, the mansion stood like a memory. He never quite escaped stone walls. Black windows, a silence that was too clean. For years, it had been his monument to grief. Tonight, it would become something else. "Stay close," he told them as he led the group up the steps. Snow clung to their hair like powdered sugar. The door unlocked with a soft click, and warmth spilled out the scent of cedar heat from the floor vents, the hush of an enormous space, waking up for the first time in years. The children stepped in wide-eyed. Ella let out a small gasp at the crystal chandelier. Ben stared at the fireplace. Sophie lingered near Nathan, still wary, but curious. He smiled gently. "You're safe now. We'll get you warm, call the shelter, get everything sorted." But before he could take another step, he froze. Down the long hallway beyond the grand piano, Laura once tried and failed to master, a door stood open. Not wide, just enough for a line of soft blue light to slip through. His heart slammed once hard. He knew that door. He had locked it himself the day they buried Laura. It hadn't been opened in 10 years. "Wait here," he murmured. But Sophie had already heard it too. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. From inside the room came the faint sound of music. A lullaby. Slow, delicate, unmistakable. Nathan's stomach turned to ice. He stepped forward, each movement careful, deliberate. The melody floated through the hall like breath on glass. Sophie said suddenly, "Where's your toy?" The boy lifted a small dented music box from his lap. It was old silver etched with curling letters. L.R. Nathan's blood ran cold. Laura Reed, his late wife's initials. He took another step toward the open door. The song grew louder, 4 notes rising, 4 falling the same tune Laura used to hum when she folded baby clothes that would never be worn. His hand shook as he touched the knob. The air inside the room smelled faintly of talc and thyme. Dust covered the rocking chair. The crib stood exactly as it had the day he sealed it away. But on the shelf right where Laura once kept her journals sat another music box identical to Ben's. The key turned on its own slowly, as if unseen fingers were winding it. The lullaby played again. Sophie clutched Ella and Evan close. Ben stared from the box in his hands to the one on the shelf, his lips trembling. Nathan stood frozen between past and present, between grief and something he couldn't yet name. The storm outside beat against the windows, but the sound was distant, almost respectful. He felt Sophie's small hand slip into his. "Are we safe here?" she asked quietly. He swallowed, hard eyes still on the 2 music boxes. "Yes," he said, though he wasn't sure if he was answering her or the echo of his wife's voice still hanging in the air. And as the lights flickered again, the house, silent for a decade, seemed to breathe. The morning after the storm, the world outside Nathan Reed's mansion looked like it had been wiped clean. Snow glittered on the iron gates, the trees along Cherry Creek sagged under white weight, and sunlight filtered weakly through the frosted windows. Inside, the house was alive again. For the first time in a decade, there were voices, soft, uncertain, but human. The scent of hot cocoa and toasted bread curled through the halls like a memory of the life Nathan thought he'd buried. He stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, stirring a copper pot on the stove. "Hot chocolate Swiss style," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "It's how my wife used to make it." The children sat at the island, wrapped in blankets, eyes following every move as if watching a magician. Sophie perched on a stool posture, straight still, quietly protective of the others. Ben leaned over the counter, curious about the steam rising from the milk. Ella and Evan, the twins, sat side by side, 2 identical faces, one serious, one bubbling with laughter. "Who's your wife?" Ben asked softly. Nathan hesitated, then smiled faintly. Her name was Laura. She liked snowy days. Said they made the world start over. He poured the thick chocolate into mugs, careful not to spill. "Let's start over, too." They cupped the warm mugs in small hands, eyes widening after the first sip. Ella let out a tiny giggle that broke the silence completely. It was the first real sound of joy that House had heard since Laura died. Nathan felt the warmth hit deeper than the drink. It filled corners he didn't realize were still frozen. Sophie studied him for a long moment. "Thank you," she said, her voice polite but distant, as if testing whether gratitude was allowed. "You saved us." Nathan shook his head. "You did most of the saving. You kept everyone calm out there. That takes courage." The compliment drew color to her cheeks, and for the first time she smiled, just a flicker. But it was there. While they ate, Nathan noticed how each child carried their own kind of quiet strength. Ben was analytical, fingers tracing the pattern on the marble countertop as if trying to understand how it was made. Ella had a restless energy, already craning her neck toward the window, asking if she could build a snowman later. Evan spoke the least, but his eyes missed nothing. They were the same clear gray as the morning light. A soft knock interrupted breakfast. Mrs. Davis Nathan's longtime housekeeper stepped in, bundled in a thick coat and scarf. Her eyes widened when she saw the scene children at the table, laughter cocoa stains on the counter. "Well," she breathed, "I thought I'd walked into the wrong house." Nathan gave her a rueful smile. "You and me, both Margaret." The woman's gaze softened as she took in the children. "They'll need warm clothes, sir, and something decent to eat beyond sugar and milk." "I'll have groceries delivered," Nathan said. "Today, and we'll call the shelter as soon as the line's clear." Mrs. Davis looked at him with the quiet understanding of someone who'd seen too many of his lonely days. "Of course," she said gently, "but maybe let them stay a little while. It's been a long night for everyone." When she left, Sophie slid off her stool and began clearing the mugs. "You don't have to," Nathan said, but she shook her head. "At the shelter, we all help. It keeps things running." Her voice carried the practiced tone of a child used to responsibility. Nathan let her do it. Some habits shouldn't be taken away too fast. Later, Nathan led them on a slow tour of the house. The grand staircase curved upward, framed by portraits of ancestors who had never meant much to him. The children's footsteps echoed, filling the empty air with a rhythm the house seemed to crave. In the living room, Ben stopped at the piano and touched a key. A single note rang out, soft, unsure, yet perfectly tuned. "It still works," he said, as if surprised. "It should," Nathan replied. "It's been waiting." When they reached the end of the hall, Sophie's eyes drifted toward the blue door. "That room from last night," she whispered. "Is it yours?" Nathan hesitated. The hallway suddenly felt narrower. "It was meant for someone else," he said quietly. "Someone who never got to use it." He pushed the door open. Sunlight spilled across the nursery. Dust floated like glitter in the air. The crib, untouched for years, still held the hand-sewn quilt Laura had made the week before the accident. The music box sat where he'd left it beside an unopened storybook. Ella gasped. "It's beautiful." Ben's gaze caught on the engraving again, LR, and he clutched his own music box tighter. "It plays the same song," he murmured. Nathan felt his throat close. "Laura collected those," he said. "She used to give them to hospitals and shelters. Maybe one found its way to you." Sophie glanced at him, something dawning behind her eyes. "She helped a lot of people, didn't she?" "She did," Nathan answered, voice low. "More than I ever realized until she was gone." The twins wandered to the window, watching the snow sparkle outside. "Can we go out later?" Ella asked. "I want to build a fort." "We'll see," Nathan said, though he already knew he'd say yes. That afternoon, he sat by the fireplace while the children napped in borrowed blankets. The sound of their soft breathing filled the room. Mrs. Davis moved quietly through the kitchen, humming a hymn under her breath. Everything felt strangely right, as if the mansion had been waiting years for this very kind of chaos, the simple human kind. When Sophie woke, she came to stand beside him, watching the fire. "I think your house is happy we're here," she said matter-of-factly. Nathan smiled. "You might be right. It doesn't feel empty anymore," she added. "It feels like it's breathing again." He looked at her, this small girl who spoke with the insight of someone twice her age, and thought, maybe so am I. The storm outside had passed, but something inside him was just beginning to stir. For the first time since Laura's death, Nathan Reed didn't feel like a man haunted by ghosts. He felt like a man who might be waking up. By the time the snow began to melt across Denver, Nathan Reed had already made up his mind. The children weren't guests anymore, they were family. He just hadn't said it out loud yet. On a gray Monday morning, Nathan sat across from Grace Walters, a family lawyer known for her calm efficiency and sharp sense of justice. Her office overlooked downtown where sunlight glinted off melting rooftops, and the faint hum of the city returned after weeks of snowbound silence. "You understand, this won't be simple," Grace said, adjusting her glasses as she looked over the first stack of papers. "You're single, you run a major corporation, and you're talking about adopting 4 children who aren't biologically related. It's possible, but the process will test every part of your life." "I've built rockets," Grace Nathan said dryly. "I can handle a few forms." She smiled faintly. "It's not the paperwork that worries me, Nathan. It's the people." Over the next weeks, his mansion turned into a crossroads of officials, social workers, and curious neighbors. Mrs. Davis made endless pots of coffee, while Nathan fielded interviews and background checks. The children's laughter filled every hallway, proof that something good had taken root, but the outside world wasn't ready to believe it yet. Sophie had started piano lessons at the local arts center, her small hands learning to shape notes into melody. Ben spent his afternoons in the garage, piecing together model rockets from spare parts Nathan had ordered. Ella painted with bold, messy joy her canvases taped to the walls of the old study. And Evan, the quietest of them all, joined a local music therapy program for kids with anxiety. His first hesitant notes on the violin made even Mrs. Davis cry. Nathan had never seen his house so alive. But life outside those walls was far less kind. When the news broke that Denver's most private billionaire was petitioning to adopt 4 abandoned children, the media swarmed. Headlines ranged from curious to cruel. Guilt or goodwill, one tabloid asked. Billionaire builds family like a brand. Nathan tried to ignore them, but he couldn't miss the looks from his neighbors at Cherry Creek Market, or the whispers when he picked the twins up from art class. The loudest critic came from just across the street. Calvin Shore, head of the neighborhood association, a man who treated every fence line like a border dispute. One afternoon, he cornered Nathan outside the gate. "I respect what you're trying to do," Calvin began in a tone that suggested the opposite. "But people are nervous. You're bringing 4 kids from a shelter into a quiet community. Reporters are camping out. It's disruptive." Nathan's patience cracked. "Disruptive," he repeated. "Is that what you call giving children a home?" Calvin raised his hands. "I'm just saying, people talk. Maybe it's too soon. Maybe they belong somewhere more prepared." Nathan took a step closer. "They belong with me, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can talk to my lawyer." That night, when he returned home, he found a folded note slipped under the gate. No name, just a message, printed on a typewriter. "You can't bring ghosts back." He read it twice, then tucked it into his coat pocket and said nothing. In the days that followed, the social worker assigned to the case, a woman named Linda Carr visited frequently. She was kind but thorough, her notebook never far from reach. Nathan walked her through every room, every safety feature, every corner of the house where laughter had replaced silence. "The children seem attached to you," Linda observed as she scribbled notes. "They're more than attached," Nathan said. "They're the reason I get up in the morning. And their adjustment. They've been through worse storms," he replied quietly. At night, when the house went quiet, Nathan caught himself watching the kids sleep on the security monitors, not out of fear, but out of awe. He'd expected to feel exhausted by the responsibility, but instead he felt anchored. Like all the noise of his old life, the boardrooms, the speeches, the markets had finally gone silent, long enough for him to hear something real. But not everyone saw it that way. One afternoon, Grace Walters called him with a strained voice. "Nathan, you should know one of your company's investors just filed an ethics complaint with the adoption committee. They're questioning whether your involvement with the kids is a publicity stunt." He felt the air leave his lungs. "A stunt? Grace, I haven't even let the press photograph them." "I know," she said, "but it's out there." and the committee listens to public perception. We'll fight it, but expect pushback. Nathan hung up and sat at his desk for a long time, staring at Laura's compass pendant lying next to his papers. Outside, he could hear the twins laughing in the yard as Sophie tried to teach them how to make snow angels. The sound reminded him why he was doing this and how much he stood to lose if he failed. That evening, as the children gathered for dinner, Sophie noticed his silence. "Did something bad happen?" she asked gently. He forced a smile. "Just grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about." Ben frowned. "Is it because of us?" Nathan reached across the table and took the boy's hand. "It's because of us," he corrected. "And that's a good thing." Mrs. Davis served roast chicken, and for a while, conversation drifted to normal things. Ella's new painting, Evan's progress in class, Sophie's stubborn determination to play Beethoven. But when the laughter faded, Nathan made a quiet vow to himself. No matter who stood in the way, he wouldn't back down. Over the next few weeks, he doubled down. He met every requirement Grace listed: psychological evaluations, financial audits, personal references. He even agreed to open his home for a neighborhood visit, though the idea made his stomach turn. When the day came, Calvin Shore himself attended, pretending civility while scanning every corner like a man searching for proof of failure. But the children changed everything. Sophie greeted visitors with poise beyond her years. Ben explained his homemade rocket design, Ella handed out cookies, and Evan played his violin softly in the background. It wasn't a performance, it was a glimpse of the life they were building together. Later that evening, Grace called him again, her tone lighter this time. "Whatever you did today," she said, "worked." The committee's tone has shifted. They're still cautious, but they're starting to believe this isn't a temporary rescue. It's a family. Nathan exhaled for the first time in weeks. After hanging up, he walked into the living room. The fire was low, the children already asleep on the couch, a pile of coloring books between them. He pulled a blanket over their shoulders and stood there a long time watching. The pushback, the gossip, the endless paperwork, it all faded in that moment. Because no matter how many questions the world asked, Nathan Reed already knew his answer. This wasn't about saving anyone. It was about being saved. The storm that hit Nathan Reed's life this time didn't come from the sky, it came from the headlines. One morning, as sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Reed mansion, the world outside turned against him. Every major network carried the same story: aerospace titan under investigation for corporate fraud. His face was everywhere on screens and papers splashed across social feeds. At first, Nathan thought it was a misunderstanding. Then came the phone calls. Board members, lawyers, reporters. His company's accounts were frozen pending investigation. The words tax evasion and embezzlement burned across the news ticker like wildfire. Within hours, the front gates of his home were surrounded by cameras and microphones. The mansion that had once felt like a sanctuary was now under siege. The timing couldn't have been worse. The adoption committee had scheduled their final review the following week. One scandal, even an unfounded one, could destroy everything. Grace Walters arrived within hours. Her briefcase clutched tight, her expression grim. "They're putting the adoption on hold until this clears," she said quietly. "Child Services will send an emergency team to assess the children's environment." Nathan's chest tightened. "They can't take them." "They haven't said that," Grace replied carefully. "But right now, perception matters more than truth." He looked toward the living room where Sophie was helping the twins with a puzzle and Ben was tinkering with his model rocket. They had no idea the ground beneath them was shifting. "I won't let them lose another home," he said. By afternoon, the front gates were lined with reporters shouting questions. "Mr. Reed, is it true you funneled money through your foundation? Is your adoption a distraction tactic?" Mrs. Davis closed the curtains and turned up the television to drown the noise. but the coverage was everywhere. Sophie noticed first. "Mr. Nathan," she asked, frowning at the TV screen, "why are they saying bad things about you?" He turned off the screen. "Because sometimes people talk before they know the truth," he said softly. "Will they take us away?" Ella whispered. Nathan knelt down so he could meet their eyes. "No one is taking you anywhere. This is your home." His voice was steady, but his hands trembled when he stood up. The next few days blurred into chaos. Investigators combed through company records. Grace worked around the clock. Child Services arrived to conduct interviews. The children sensed the tension even if they didn't understand it. Evan began waking at night, startled by nightmares. Sophie tried to stay strong, sitting with him until he fell asleep again. One evening, as freezing rain battered the windows, Denver was hit by another blackout. The mansion went dark. Only the flicker of the fireplace lit the room. Mrs. Davis fetched candles, her face pale in the glow. The children huddled together on the floor, frightened but silent. Then from upstairs came a sound that stopped everyone cold, a lullaby. Soft, haunting, and unmistakably familiar. The same melody from the music boxes. Nathan's heart dropped. He stood moving toward the staircase. "Stay here," he said, though. Sophie rose to follow him. "It's coming from the nursery," she whispered. He nodded. The door stood half open, swaying gently as if touched by an unseen hand. Inside, the music box on the shelf played on its own, its delicate mechanism spinning though no one had wounded. The other one, Ben's, lay silent on the floor beside the crib. Nathan picked it up, his fingers trembling. Behind him, Sophie said quietly, "Maybe she's watching." He turned. "Who, your wife?" Sophie said. "Laura. Maybe she knows you're scared." Nathan closed his eyes. For a moment he could almost feel Laura there, the calm she used to bring when storms raged too loudly. "Then she knows I can't lose them," he murmured. When he came back downstairs, the children were waiting, candles flickering around them. "Tell us a story," Ben said. "The one about the stars." So Nathan did. He sat with them by the fire, speaking softly about constellations and ancient travelers who followed light through dark skies. As he talked, the tension in their small faces eased. Ella's head dropped onto his shoulder, then Evan's. Sophie sat quietly, her hand gripping his. Outside, the rain turned to snow again, coating the city in white silence. When the lights finally flickered back on, Nathan looked around the room. The children were asleep in a heap of blankets. Mrs. Davis stood in the doorway, tears shining in her eyes. Grace's text buzzed on his phone. "Working on a statement. Don't lose hope. Truth will surface." He typed back, "It has to. Too much depends on it." As dawn broke, Nathan stepped into the hall and glanced toward the nursery door. It was closed again. The music had stopped. But something in the air had shifted, not fear, not grief, but resolve. The world outside might doubt him. The courts might question him. But he had made his choice. No matter how long it took, he would fight not for his reputation, but for the 4 small souls who had turned his house from a monument of loss into a home filled with life. The truth arrived quietly, not with the drama of flashing lights or breaking news, but with a single email that changed everything. It came early one Thursday morning, while Denver was still draped in soft gray fog. Nathan Reed was in the kitchen making breakfast for the children, pancakes, because it was the only thing he could make without burning, when Grace Walters called. "Nathan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you need to check your inbox. Right now." He pulled out his phone. The subject line was simple. My confession. Julian Cross, his former CFO, the man who had vanished when the investigation began. Nathan's heart pounded as he opened the message. Julian admitted everything: the fraudulent accounts, the falsified transfers, The deliberate setup meant to frame Nathan before he could uncover the scheme. Attached were documents, signatures, timestamps, all of it undeniable proof that Nathan Reed was innocent. Julian's final words struck hardest. I couldn't live knowing my lies might destroy a man who tried to do good and take 4 children's futures with him. Grace was already contacting the authorities, the press, the adoption committee. "It's over," she said breathlessly. "You're cleared, Nathan. Completely cleared." He leaned against the counterphone, still in his hand, staring at the children as they laughed over a crooked stack of pancakes. Sophie was helping Evan pour syrup. Ella was coloring on the table with a crayon. Ben was explaining why burnt pancakes tasted scientifically better. Nathan felt something loosen inside his chest, something that had been wound tight for months. "Grace," he whispered, "tell them to make it official. All of it." By afternoon, every news outlet in Colorado was reporting the same story that had once condemned him, now rewritten. Reed exonerated. CFO confesses to fraud. Cameras still camped outside his gates, but this time the questions shouted through the cold were different. How does it feel to be vindicated? What's next for you and the children? Nathan didn't answer any of them. He only said, "The truth took longer than I hoped, but it got here." That evening, Grace arrived at the mansion with a folder in her hands. The adoption committee had convened an emergency meeting. Their decision was unanimous. "You're officially their father," she said, sliding the papers across the table. For a long time, Nathan didn't move. His hands hovered above the documents as if afraid to touch them. Then Sophie stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to sign, Mr. Nathan. That makes it real." He smiled through tears that came before he could stop them. "No," he said softly. "It's been real for a while now." Still, he picked up the pen. His hand shook once, then steadied. With one clean motion, he signed his name. Nathan Reed, father of Sophie, Benella, and Evan Reed. The children clapped, and Ella, in her usual dramatic flair, shouted, "We're a real family now." Evan's laugh filled the room, and even Grace wiped her eyes. Mrs. Davis appeared from the kitchen doorway, holding a cake she'd made in secret. "Every family needs a proper celebration," she declared. The icing read, "Welcome home," in uneven blue letters. Later that night, as the house quieted, Nathan stood by the nursery window. Outside, the city glittered under the faint shimmer of snowfall. On the shelf behind him, the 2 music boxes sat side by side. He turned the key on one and listened to the soft melody fill the room. The same lullaby that had once haunted him now sounded like a blessing. He whispered into the empty air, "We made it, Laura. We're finally home." The following weekend, the mansion came alive for a celebration that spilled into the garden. Neighbors who once whispered now arrived with flowers, gifts, and apologies. Even Calvin Shore stood awkwardly by the gate, hat in hand. "You proved me wrong, Reed," he admitted. "Guess I was afraid of change." Nathan shook his hand. "Change is all this house ever needed." The children ran through the yard, their laughter mingling with music and the hum of conversation. Sophie played a short piece on the piano, her confidence blooming under the applause. Ben showed off his latest rocket design to a group of fascinated guests. Ella and Evan ran around with faces covered in frosting, the kind of mess that would have once made Nathan cringe, but now he couldn't stop smiling. As the sun dipped behind the Rockies, Grace joined him on the porch, watching the scene unfold. "You realize this story will go everywhere," she said. "A billionaire rescues 4 children, fights for them, wins them back. It's the kind of thing people need to believe in right now." Nathan shook his head. "It's not a story," he said simply. "It's life." 5 years later, on another snowy morning in Denver, The Reed mansion looked nothing like the one he once wandered alone. The walls were lined with photographs, birthdays, piano recitals, science fairs, paint-splattered smiles. Sophie, now 12, practiced piano before school. Ben, 11, built a model for a youth invention competition. Ella painted on the back porch while Evan tuned his violin for the winter concert. Nathan stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, marveling at the ordinary beauty of it all. His hair was grayer, his pace slower, but his heart was full in ways he hadn't thought possible. That evening, after the house quieted, he returned to the nursery, not as a shrine, but as a living part of their home. He picked up Laura's silver compass from the shelf, the one engraved with their initials. Through the window, snow fell in slow, gentle flurries, blanketing the city in quiet peace. Sometimes he murmured, setting the compass beside the music boxes the hardest storms bring us where we're meant to be. Outside, laughter echoed faintly from the children's rooms. Inside, the last light of day caught the reflection of the compass and scattered it across the walls like tiny stars. And for Nathan Reed, who had once believed his life ended in loss that night, marked something far greater than survival. It was a second sunrise. When the first snow fell that winter, Nathan Reed was a man who had everything except a reason to live. By the time spring returned, he had something far greater than wealth, a family that had taught him how to feel again. His story began with loss and isolation, but ended with warmth, laughter, and the kind of love that money could never buy. The man who once hid behind walls of stone and silence found his purpose not in business or success, but in the innocent eyes of 4 children who showed up at his door on the coldest night of his life. From the moment Nathan found Sophie, Ben, Ella, and Evan shivering beneath that park bench, his path was rewritten. What started as an act of compassion became a rebirth. Each child reflected a part of him, long buried: Sophie's strength, Ben's curiosity, Ella's joy, and Evan's quiet tenderness. Through them, he rediscovered patience, laughter, and the simple rhythm of being needed. The mansion that had been a monument to grief became a home, alive with music, mischief, and the smell of cocoa on winter mornings. But the road wasn't easy. The outside world judged him, questioned his intentions, and tried to tear apart what had barely begun to heal. The scandal that followed tested every ounce of faith he had left. Yet, in the middle of chaos, when the lights went out, when the headlines screamed his name in accusation, it wasn't money or power that saved him. It was love, the love that kept him steady, the love that gave 4 children a father, and the love that turned a broken man into someone whole again. When the truth came, it didn't arrive with fanfare. It came quietly in the form of a confession that cleared his name and restored his dignity. But even before that, Nathan had already won. The moment he looked into those children's eyes and saw trust instead of fear, laughter instead of sorrow, he understood what real victory meant. Signing those adoption papers wasn't the end of his story, it was the beginning of his second life. Nathan Reed's journey reminds us that the greatest transformations often come disguised as tragedy. Sometimes we are stripped of everything familiar, so that something truer can take its place. He thought his story ended with loss, but life had other plans. It brought him back to what really matters: family connection, and the courage to open your heart even when it's been broken. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. We live in a world that measures success by what we achieve, but Nathan's story teaches that our real legacy is who we love, who we protect, and who we choose to let in. No matter how lost you feel, no matter how long the winter lasts, there's always a chance for a second sunrise. Healing begins the moment we dare to care again. So, if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness still matters, that hope can outlast any storm, then don't let it end here. Stay with us. Subscribe to this channel and help us keep sharing stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the goodness that still exists in this world. Your support gives us the strength to create more heartfelt content and continue shining light into dark places. Because somewhere out there, someone is still standing in their storm, waiting to believe again. Let's help them find their second sunrise together.